I just don't like them. Funerals. There's a lot of humor on TV about funerals, but when it's your child, when it's your spouse or your parents, it does something bad to your insides. 155,000 people die every day on this planet. At best, that's only a statistic, but at its worst, it's someone you know, someone you love, and it's something that hurts. So what happens when a person dies? Is this just the end of the line as evolution teaches? Or is the grave, as many suggest, just a doorway that leads to a new reality? On this point, Jesus' teachings are a giant thunderbolt of confusion and contradiction to almost every form of religion that's out there, including Christianity. When it comes to the subject of death, the teachings of Jesus do not start in the four Gospels. They start in the book of Genesis. In John 1:3, the last of Christ's 12 disciples makes this bold statement: "All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made." In other words, Jesus was the Creator God. The Apostle Paul wrote the same message to the believers in Ephesus. Ephesians 3:9 says, "God who created all things by Jesus Christ." John plainly stated, "The world was made by Him." John 1:10, "For by Him, that is, by Jesus, were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by Him and for Him. And He is before all things, and by Him all things consist." So back in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 17, the Creator God, in love for His new creation, warned our first parents not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." The key word here is die, not live. In this verse, God is either telling the truth or telling a lie. He either means what He says or His words have no meaning at all. In Genesis 3, verse 4, we find a serpent sitting in this very tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This interloper encourages our first mother to eat of the forbidden fruit. She knows she should not eat or even touch it, and she knows the consequence of doing so is death. But the serpent said unto the woman, "Ye shall not surely die." Creator says you will, snake says you won't. Today, each of us has a choice. We will either believe what the Creator God says, or we will believe what Satan, that old serpent, the devil, says. From the dawning of time, the source of all love and all truth has offered to us the truth about death. And when Emmanuel, God with us, came to this earth, He reiterated that truth. So what was Jesus' disruptive doctrine about death?
Well, there's probably no better way to see and understand the teachings of Jesus about death than by examining the story of Lazarus here in Bethany. And we're on our way to his first tomb, and as we're headed there, Andrea, why don't you get us started on the story?
Sure. This story starts in John chapter 11. "Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby.
So, what do we know from these first 4 verses?
Well, we know that Lazarus is sick, and his sisters, Mary and Martha, are sufficiently concerned to send a message to Jesus, fully expecting him to come and work his healing powers on their brother.
The followers of Jesus believed that he had the prophetic gift. And so Mary and Martha must have found some courage and hope when Jesus said, This sickness is not unto death. But Jesus delayed his coming.
He did delay his coming, even though he loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days in the same place where he was.
Then Jesus said to his disciples, Let's go back to Judea. Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep.
Okay, what does sleep mean? Here is where the teaching of Jesus needs a complete reading of the text, because if you read the story in context, it's absolutely clear.
An important principle in biblical study says, a text without a context is a pretext. That is to say, you can take a single word, or even a single sentence, and make it say almost anything. So the context, the bigger picture, can create a broader, more complete understanding of the text. Jesus said his friend Lazarus was sleeping. So, what's the context?
Well, the disciples thought this was great. They said, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead.
We often use colloquialisms to describe something that's difficult to talk about. When referring to death, we use words like crossing over or passing on. But when Jesus used the word sleep to describe death, he was deliberate in his intent. For example, in Matthew 9, Jesus came to the home of the ruler of the synagogue in Capernaum. His daughter had died, and people had already gathered to mourn her passing. He said to them, Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed him to scorn. They laughed at Jesus because they all knew she was dead. But here again, Jesus calls death sleep. Death and sleep have some real similarities, but the most notable is the suspension of consciousness. 8 hours can quickly pass by, but we are unaware of our surroundings or lapse of time. This was the same teaching of Solomon in Ecclesiastes 9:5. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything. Neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. The Word of God clearly states the dead don't know anything. Here in Israel, when you want to remember a departed loved one, it is a custom to leave a stone on the grave. It is a reminder to us, the living, that we are not the only ones who have come to remember. But for the person inside the grave, it means absolutely nothing, because they're asleep, completely unconscious to the world around them. Unfortunately, this restful truth does not resonate with most people on this planet, including Christians. But whether we choose to accept it or not, the truth is still the truth, and death, being an unconscious state of sleep, is the clear teaching of Scripture. In fact, 66 times the term sleep is used for death in 17 different books of the Bible. The same is true in the case of Lazarus. Jesus said, Lazarus was asleep and he was going to wake him up. The disciples took Jesus literally. He's sleeping, let him rest. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Two small observations here before we move on. Back in the day, they didn't have cell phones or email. So how did Jesus know that Lazarus was dead? The same way he knew that Lazarus' illness would not ultimately end in death. My second observation is that Jesus clearly understood that Lazarus had died, and so did everyone else. In fact, in the story of Lazarus in John 11, it is categorically stated 8 times that Lazarus was dead. And by the time Jesus had finally showed up, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days.
Yes, it had been 4 days since Lazarus had died when Jesus finally showed up here in Bethany. And it would appear that Jesus was late. But God's plans know no haste and no delay. What appears to be our extremity is God's opportunity to better showcase his unlimited power and love for the human race.
When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she slipped out to meet him. And from the pain in her heart, she said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died."
There was no recrimination in her words, just disappointment and sadness. But I think the next two verses reveal why she could keep herself from going negative. She knew who she was talking to.
Absolutely. "If you had been here, my brother would not have died," she said. "But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee."
Martha knew she was talking to someone who wasn't limited.
And that was born out of the promise he made to her. "Thy brother will rise again."
So here's Jesus teaching on death. Just as sleep is temporary, so death is also temporary for those who love the Lord. But Martha already knew that.
She did. Verse 24, Martha saith unto him, "I know he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day."
How did Martha know about the resurrection of the last day? Well, because she was also a disciple of Jesus. She knew what Jesus taught on that subject.
And here's what he taught from Mark chapter 12, verse 26 and 27. "And as touching the dead, that they rise. Have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err." Jesus said, there will be a time when the dead rise.
That's exactly what Jesus said in John 5, 28 and 29. He said, "Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming when all who are in the graves will hear his voice and will come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." Here Jesus expands our understanding with one more insight. Not only will there be a resurrection when dead people will come back to life, or the sleeping people will be awakened, there's actually going to be two resurrections. Now, we need to unpack that further, but we're going to do that at another time.
The point we need to make here is that Jesus taught there is something beyond death.
Indeed, and that something is called the resurrection.
Right, and didn't Paul refer to that as the blessed hope?
Yes, in his letter to Titus, he said he was looking for that blessed hope, and he defined that as the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ, when the dead will be raised to life again.
Hey, there's the tomb.
In Matthew 21 and in Luke 20, the Bible makes it very clear that Jesus definitively believed in and taught the resurrection as one of his kingdom truths. But he told Martha, and he's telling us, that the resurrection is not so much an event in the future. The resurrection is a person. Jesus said unto her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." There is no resurrection and no life and no way to get there if we don't have Jesus. And in John 11, verse 26, Jesus makes such a radical claim, we must conclude that he is mad or that he is opening up one of the most precious truths about death that we could ever embrace. "And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Jesus asked Martha that question, and he's asking us that question. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Martha's answer was, "Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world." She chose to say yes to the Lord's doctrines, yes to his teachings, his truth. Anyone can make a foolish claim that has no basis in reality. Martha, on the other hand, based her faith on the reality of prophecy that pointed directly to Jesus and on the works that Jesus had already done, the miracles he had wrought that could never have been done in normal human strength. In stark contrast to Martha's steady, calculated faith is the blatant and willfully blind rejection by the priests and Pharisees of Christ's teachings on death. The same truth that Christ shared with Martha in John 11, he had already sought to share with the Jewish leaders in John chapter 8. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my saying, he shall never see death. Then said the Jews unto him, Now we know that thou hast a devil. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say, If a man keep my saying, he shall never taste of death. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? And the prophets are dead. Whom makest thou thyself? By asking their indignant question in verse 53, Are you greater than Abraham and the prophets? Who do you think you are? They were actually asking, Are you greater than death? Jesus had said, If a man keep my saying, he shall never see death. Are you greater than death? No human being had ever cheated death. Even the great pillars of faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, David, Daniel, and Isaiah, had all died. So how could these words possibly be true? The only one who could rescue mortal souls from the grip of death would be the one who could create life. Jesus claimed to be the resurrection and the life. Either this is an idle claim, or this is the truth. Let's rejoin Levi and Andrea at Lazarus' tomb as we seek to discover the truth concerning this mighty doctrine and claim of Jesus.
Jesus taught it, and Martha believed it. At the end of this world, there is going to be a resurrection when all who are in their graves will awake out of the sleep of death.
And today, we're standing here at Lazarus' first tomb, which stands as a monument, a living testament to the truth and teachings of Jesus. Hey, I'm gonna head on in.
I wonder what Jesus would have been feeling as he stood here at this tomb.
You know, that's a great question, Levi. Perhaps the two most touching passages in John 11 are the ones that show the feelings, the emotions that were in Jesus' heart. The first is verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. No one gets through this life without some pain, without some tears. We live in a world at war with God's law of love. This war causes a great deal of pain, hurt, and loss. Often the mind may be clouded because of this pain. When that happens, don't try to think. Just cling to this one truth. Jesus loves you. He understands your disorientation, your weakness, and tears. In such cases, you may do His will by simply resting in His arms. The second verse that opens our view to the emotions of Jesus is verse 38. Jesus therefore again groaning in himself cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus understands our emotions. He has tasted the saltiness and the bitterness of our tears. He understands the feeling of loss, of pain. But that day when Jesus came to the tomb of Lazarus, he was not weeping merely for Lazarus, Mary, or Martha. He was weeping for the countless millions who would never know the joy of the blessed hope of the resurrection. Jesus cares about everyone, even those who choose to reject him and are finally lost forever. He weeps for them. When Jesus came to the tomb of Lazarus, he said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, "Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days." It may not be socially acceptable, and it may not be politically correct, but it's time to cooperate with Jesus. When we obey his command to take away the stone of indifference, of apathy, of disbelief, when we are ready to be honest with Jesus and to the world, to admit that our way stinks and has led to the death of God's plan for our life, the way is clear for Jesus to create a miracle of new life in us. Jesus saith to Martha, "Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? He wants us to see the glory and the power of God. He wants to do miracles in our lives so that we can believe. I think the hardest job that we have is making the choice to let God be God, to believe what he says. Jesus had already told Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me.
Just as described in the Bible, the tomb of Lazarus is a cave, and as such, you have to go down 28 steps to get to the bottom. When Jesus came to the entrance of this tomb, he fully intended to do a miracle. He was going to show that he was indeed more powerful than death, more powerful than our strongest fear.
It looks less like a cave now since the Crusaders strengthened the tomb with masonry, which obscures most of the original rock surface. But the cave and its structure isn't what's important here. Here's where Jesus submitted humanity the ultimate proof, second only to his own resurrection, of his divinity. Here he presents a crowning act, a living evidence that he is indeed the Son of God.
Okay, so you now have an idea of how far down in the ground Lazarus was buried. All right, Levi, what happens next?
John 11 says, Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I know that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth.
With intense and painful interest, all up at the entrance were listening and watching for the evidence that would substantiate his claim to be the Son of God. They wanted to know if Jesus really did have power over the grave. The voice of Jesus was clear and penetrating. It pierced the ear of the dead and sleeping Lazarus. Life sprang into the lifeless shell of a man, and he lived.
There's just one problem. Lazarus was wrapped up like a mummy. John 11:44 says, He was bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin.
So the same power that gave him life picked him up and transported his once limp body out of the burial chamber and up the steps and placed him at the entrance of the tomb. No one likes the thought of death, placed in the ground to decompose, and that was never God's intention. His desire is for us to live forever.
And what happened to Lazarus here wasn't some strange, isolated incident. And Jesus said, a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and will come out. Those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned.
The teachings of Jesus make it absolutely clear how anyone can escape their tomb and live forever with him.
In John 6:49-51, Jesus made it unmistakable that he is the living bread. If we want to live forever, we must eat that bread. Jesus interprets what he means in verse 63. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. His words are life. Many times we go through the day as the walking dead. We may be physically alive, but spiritually and emotionally, we're actually dead.
Jesus really emphasizes that point in John 5:24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that hears my word and believes on God that sent me hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death unto life. There's life in the word, and no life outside the word.
And Jesus also taught that just hearing and believing his words isn't enough to escape death. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my sayings, he shall never see death. Salvation is not just a mental assent. Salvation must also include doing what he says, being obedient to his will, his law of love.
Saying yes to him with every choice.
Andrea, Levi, I believe it. Starting in Genesis, the Bible teaches that life comes from God, and obedience to him preserves that life. If you disobey, you lose that life. You die. In John 3:16, Jesus confirmed that teaching, that doctrine. Now, there are some Christians who find this teaching so disruptive. No, we have a soul that lives on, a spirit consciousness that transcends death. We go to heaven immediately when we die. Often stated, but not biblical. The three words translated in the Bible as immortal are only used in 16 verses. Not once are they used to tell us that a human soul is immortal. In fact, these verses tell us the exact opposite. 3 verses tell us plainly that only God is immortal. And here is the verse that is most clear. It speaks to us of the King of kings and Lord of lords, who only hath immortality, while dwelling in the light which no man can approach. 9 of the verses make clear that man is not immortal. And 9 of the verses make clear that man is searching and striving for immortality. If, as some suppose, we already have an immortal soul, then why would we be searching for it? So, who are you going to believe? God and his Bible, or Satan? The serpent told Eve, "You won't die," but the evidence shows he was wrong, dead wrong. And that old snake is still tempting us to believe his lie. So, I've chosen to believe the clear teachings of Jesus. There is life after death, but that will be at the resurrection, at the last day. That's what Jesus said in John 6, verse 44. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. Behold, I show you a mystery, writes Paul. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Lazarus' first tomb is empty, proving Jesus has power over death and the tomb. So, who are you choosing to believe? The truth, or the one who has already proven himself to be dead wrong?